Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I think we're good to get started. Welcome to today's webinar called Test, How to Build Production-Ready Workflows in Alteryx. My name's Ian Baldwin, and I'll be walking you through some of the test tools, message tools, and crew macros today. So, what is our problem for our scenario today? We want to analyze the number of newly built houses in England and Wales over the last 20 years. Data comes in yearly files, and we want to make our workflows robust enough to avoid duplicate inputs and ensure that we're receiving data only for new build properties. By making our solution more robust, we can ensure this workflow doesn't take a high amount of effort to maintain. So, with that premise, we have this workflow here, new build analysis. It's a fairly simple workflow. It's taking in data from a directory input and dynamically reading it in. So I've got a data folder here that has a list of new builds for the last 20 years in England. And then there's also a spatial file as well for combining our data with some geographic spatial files. We read in the file, dynamically inputs all 20 of them. There's a bit of data prep, some joining our spatial file onto the data based on county or based on district. And we bring that joins together, and then we have an output ready to create our reports in Tableau. And then when we take that data, bring it into Tableau, we've got a couple of charts here. The first one is just a timeline looking at the number of new builds per year. And this doesn't look quite right looking from our data. So there's kind of natural fluctuations. There was a dip with the crisis in 2007, 2008, and that's slowly been recovering. But 2018 looks way out of place compared to previous years, where there's a jump from 106,000 to more than double to 220,000. So that spike is so suspicious that there's probably a data issue with the data that's come in. And in our second dashboard, we've got a map where we've joined all of our spatial information together, and there's a couple of holes in our map. So this should be new builds by authority. We can see this heat map, but we can see a couple of different sections in England and Wales where we're missing data. So where we've joined our underlying new builds data with our shapefile, it appears that some data hasn't come through and it's dropped out. So we want to make our workflow more robust so that we can spot these data issues before we get to our reporting in Tableau. So with that in mind, this was our standard workflow, kind of had the inputs, data transformation, joining, and had outputs. But there's no kind of real oversight to check the data along the way. With the join tools, you could add browse tools on the left-hand, right-hand side and see that there's some data falling out. But relying on browse tools isn't something you want to do if you're going to be automating your workflow, putting it on server, and then having it run every day. You can't actually access those browse tools. So we need something more robust that's going to catch them. And so with that in mind, I've got a workflow here, and we're going to fill in the steps looking at using a few different tools to catch these, namely the test tool and the message tool. And so, we've got our input and we've got our directory input. The directory input, when you read it in, gives you a list of all of your file names, the folders they came from, the directories they came from, and then some information that's held within File Explorer, looking at the creation time for a file, when it was last written, and the size of the file in bytes. So with this information, it's possible to work out if you've got duplicate files coming in, and catch them before we send them all into the dynamic input tool. So between creation time and size, you can start to get an idea of if there might be duplicate files. So my suspicion with the timeline here is that we've got 2017, 28 is really big, and we don't have any 2019 data, even though in our folder we can see a file for 2019. So something's gone wrong with our 2019 data here. My suspicion is that 2019 is actually a duplicate of 2018. And if we scroll down, we can see from the directory input that the creation times are the same and the size of the files are exactly the same. There is a very small chance that they could be exactly the same by pure coincidence, but the size column tells you the size in number of bytes. So if something is 7 megabytes, that's going to be 7 million bytes. If it's exactly the same all the way down to the last digit, that's a suggestion that it's just a duplicate of that same file. So I want to catch these duplicates and filter them out and warn myself that these duplicates exist. So to catch those duplicates and filter them out, first of all, I want to bring in a unique tool. And this unique tool is just going to make sure that each of these files has these unique attributes. Again, there is a very small chance that, like absolutely minute chance, that they could be the same, but it's much more likely they're not. So I'm going to take creation time and size and make them unique. And just to start off with, I'm going to add browse tools to see this unique tool is going to capture this duplicate, and it reckons new builds 2019 is a duplicate file. As we saw from browsing, we think it's a duplicate file of the 2018 file. And once we filtered it out, we can use our unique values and just read those ones in. But I also want to warn myself that there are potential duplicates. And so to do that warning, we're going to use the message tool. The message tool allows you to give yourself unique, like business-driven messages when you run a workflow. So every time you run a workflow, you get these messages from Alteryx that say the input tool read in this many records from this many files, a filter tool filtered out so many records, and so on. But you can also use what's called the message tool to generate each of these by themselves and make them relevant to whatever you're looking for. So in this case, I want to say new builds 2019 was a duplicate file. So we can use the message tool. The message tool exists in the group of tools called developer. So if you scroll along the top of your toolbar, you're going to find the message tool. I find it's so far across that it's actually easier just to search for it in the search bar, and we can search for message and we get the message tool here. And I'm going to drag and drop this and connect it to my unique tool, and we get this configuration pane on the left hand side. So the message tool kind of has three different sections to it. The first section is when you want to send a message. There's 4 different options here. The first one is before the first record. So if any data comes into a message tool, you can send a message immediately. You can create custom logic to check data at the row level. So using before rows where expression is true, you can check data at the row level. You could say if number is larger than 10, you'd get a message every time your number is larger than 10. If you want a message every time, you can put in the word true in quotes, and that will send you a message for every row of data coming through. You can also send it after the last record has been sent, or you can send it at the end of the workflow once all downstream tools have been completed. So in this case, I want to send a message on every row. In this case, there is only one row coming through, but if I had 5 duplicate files, I would want to know about all 5 duplicate files. So I'm going to choose before where my expression is true, and I'm going to make my expression true, so that it's true every time. And so that's configuring when you want to send a message. The next two options are to do with message type and priority. So this is about, do you want to send a normal message? So a normal message where you get black text in your messages. You can also send warnings. So if you sent it as a warning, you'd get yellow text. You can send it as a conversion error, and that will give you an orange bit of text, or you can send it as an error and you get one of those red error messages in Alteryx. Then message priority is to do with if you're using macros and you want messages coming through in macros, then you need to set it to high priority, because normal priority only works if your message tool is in the top level workflow. If it's nested inside macros, normal priority ones won't be surfaced back up to the top. So message priority is to do with macros there. If in doubt, change it to high and you'll always see it. And then lastly, there's this box transient. Transient just means, do you want the message to disappear once it's finished running or not? So that's useful if you want to track progress on a tool, and you can say like 5 out of 6 files complete, 6 out of 6 files complete, and then once it's done, that message disappears. So in our case, we're using a top level workflow, and I just want a normal message, so that's okay. But as I said, I could, if I wanted more priority, I could give it a yellow warning, or I could make it a red error. So that's the message types. And then the last bit is the message expression. And so the message expression allows you to write your custom message so that you make sure your message is business relevant to you and you're going to understand what's going on. And so in this case, I'm going to want to say something like file new build 2019 is a duplicate file, and you can have hard-coded text and dynamic text coming in from the fields. So if I want to create my message, I can say something like file, put this in quotes, that bit's hard-coded, plus, and then this bit is where we're going to say our file name. So file plus file name, that's going to be dynamic to whichever files come through. And then I'm going to say appears to be a duplicate file. And so that hard-coded text is in quote marks, and then we reference the file like we would as a formula tool. We bring in file name and we have that. So with that message tool configured, I can run this workflow, and I now see at the bottom, message 91, file new builds 2019.yxdb appears to be a duplicate file. If I want to give this, like, make it stand out a bit more, I can make it a warning, and then now I get this yellow message that just stands out a bit more saying file new builds 2019 appears to be a duplicate file. And so with that, I can see very quickly out of my directory input, this file, I should go back to the data owner, whoever generated it, and yeah, check if we can actually get the real 2019 data coming through. And so that's kind of, warned us about dodgy files, duplicate files. We can now dynamically read in the rest. And this will read in my files 2000 to 2018. 2 million rows or so read from 19 files. and we can go on to the next step. So in this data, everything should be a new build. So this is all open public data in the UK, looking at any house that's been sold over the last 20 years, and there's kind of key bits of information about them. So you can see what property type, so SDF, that's like semi-detached, detached, or flat, or whatever, and then there's this column, new build. I only want to see how many new builds that we've built in this country. That's what my dashboard, my analysis is going to be around. So I want to check that this new build data is always white. So I can bring in a filter, and I'm going to check new build is equal to white. And generally, like when you're developing a workflow, you kind of just add 2 browse tools, bring them in, and kind of see if any data drops out. I'm going to cache and run that workflow so that the data loads quicker. And we'll see how this filter looks. So actually, in this case, we've got 2 million rows coming through as true, and nothing coming through as false, which is really good. Our data is correct, but just because it's correct now, it might not be correct in the future. So I want to build in a test that's going to stop the workflow if there was any data coming through that was incorrect. So this time, instead of having a message, I want to bring in a tool called the test tool, and the test tool throws up red Alteryx errors every time a condition isn't met. So the test tool is another grey one in the developers group. Again, I find it easier to search for it in the toolbar. So I'm going to search for test, and here it is. And I'm going to have a test on the false output of my filter just to check like any data that's coming through. One thing you'll notice on the test tool is it's got these double grey chevron arrows. So much like the union tool, you can have as many inputs going into it as you want. And if you wanted to test multiple things from multiple inputs, that's all possible with the test tool. And on the left-hand side, you get the list of tests that you've created for your data. As it stands, I've not built any, so it's a white box, and I want to add a new one. So I click add, and we get this pop-up box. Here you can name your test, choose which input connection you're testing against. So as I said, multiple data streams can go into the test tool, and you can do tests on stream 1, stream 2, stream 3, so on, however many you've got. In this case, I want to test all houses are new builds. So I'm just going to say all houses are new builds. And then input connection number 1. And then there's different tests you can do. So the first test you can do is record count matches a specific value. In this case, I want record count to be 0. If there's any data coming through at all, then I would want to flag up an error. So that's really useful. Another use case of that is on the left-hand or right-hand side of joins. If you're not expecting any data to fall out, you can say record count matches specific value. Other options are record count matches other inputs record count. So if you've got 2 files, you're trying to reconcile them, and you think you should have exactly the same number of rows, you can put both inputs in and compare input 1 against input 2 and check they have the same number of records. You can do logical tests, so you can check an expression is true for all records. So much like the message tool, if you want everything to be a number larger than 10, you could say number is larger than 10, and then if it wasn't true for every record, you'd get an error. Or if you don't want to test everything, if you've got millions of rows and you just want to test it once, you can test it on the first record and then kind of take that assumption that it'd be true everywhere else. In this case, I want record count matches specific value, and I'm going to take my test value as 0. And so with that test set up, I can run the workflow. And the test tool doesn't do anything because rightly there is no data coming into it. But I can show you in a new workflow what this would look like if there was data coming into it. So I'm going to bring in a text input tool here and just have field 1 with a row of data. And having the test tool here, I'm going to rebuild this the same way. Check no records. Record count matches specific value. And I'm going to say equals to 0. And when I run it this time, because there's data flowing into it, it's saying the test, check no records, failed, expected 0 records, found 1 record. So that's how the test tool looks when it fails, and that's really useful for flagging anything up. Luckily, in our workflow, all of our data is good this time round, but you do always want to make sure anywhere you've got a filter, put a test tool on the output that you're not expecting anything to come through on, or if you've got a join left and right outputs, put a test tool just to check those things. Yeah, really my advice is anywhere you've got a browse tool in a workflow, when you want to make it production ready and you want to push your workflows up onto server, replace those browse tools with test tools, and then you'll be immediately flagged to if any errors come through. So that's okay. We've now got our data flowing through, and then there's some more data transformation steps. And then we get to the point where we're joining our main data stream to a shapefile. And as I was saying, looking at our Tableau report, it looks like there's some counties, some authorities missing from our data. So this is going to be data that's falling out of the joins. And yeah, so we've got 2 joins, we've got our data coming through. We can track it in my example workflow that I've already run. We can track it, we can see our list of counties and the number of sales and their median price. There's a join looking for comparing county to the authority, and on the join, 5,400 rows match and 1,500 don't. And then to capture that second group of 1,500, there's a second join joining on district rather than county. And for this one, 1,300 matches out of 1,500. That still means there's 200 rows of data approximately that don't have a matching shapefile and are falling out of the left-hand side of the join and not being caught. If I wanted to completely stop the workflow, I could put in that test tool, have the error, and say, yeah, any data is falling out. I know there's a lot of data that is falling out, and I don't want to completely stop the workflow. I just want to, in this case, be able to flag it up as an issue that should be addressed at some point. So rather than having an error and stopping the workflow, I'm just going to want to throw up another warning and say, hey, this data is missing. And then I can always go back and look for the new shapefiles with the best data. And if I set a message for every row of this data, we'd get 228 messages. That would be a bit overkill. It'd be saying Bournemouth 2000 missing, Bournemouth 2001 missing, Bournemouth 2002 missing, Bournemouth 2003 missing, and so on and so on. If I keep going with that, that's going to just bore me to death and overwhelm me with too much information. So I'm going to start thinking about how I can, manipulate this data so that I can get more useful messages on it. So rather than saying Bournemouth 2000 to 2001, 2002, 2003 are all missing, I want to be able to aggregate this up and say Bournemouth 2000 to 2018 is missing and have that as a single message. And then Avon have one message, and then say Cheshire, I'm going to want that all as one message as well. So to do that, before bringing in a message tool, I'm going to aggregate my data up using a summarize tool that's going to collapse those 200 rows into maybe 20 and give me better summary information. So I'm going to connect my left-hand output of my join to a summary tool to just aggregate everything up. And I'm going to take district and county, group those together. So it's going to say district Bournemouth, county Bournemouth, and then years 2000 to 2018 we're missing. If I want to get that range of dates, I'm going to need my minimum year and my maximum year. And then from that aggregation, I'll be able to create a message with that range of dates. So again, the message tool, the easiest way to find it is to search for message rather than scrolling all the way across. I'm going to bring this into the workflow. And again, once I've got this aggregation, I'm going to want a message for every row of the data set. So I'm going to say, give me a message on every row. So I'm going to say every row where the expression true is true. And then for my message expression, I'm going to say something like district comma, so district is dynamic, and then I'm going to add comma in quotes, and then county, that's going to be dynamic. Then I'm going to add years, so I'm going to say Bournemouth, comma, Bournemouth, in that case, years 2000 to 2018 are missing a shapefile. So I put in years, that's hard-coded, and then I'm going to add in min year, and then some more text to, and then max year, and then is missing in the shapefile. So Alteryx is giving me a little error here. So everything that we're doing in our expression should be text. So if I want to reference min year and max year in my text expression, I'm going to have to convert those numbers to text first. So I'm going to need to wrap each of the years in a not a two number formula, to string, I think. Let's check that that is correct. If we go into the functions and go to conversions, then my formula should be to string. And so I also need to wrap max year into string as well. I'll take this expression, that's a bit small, it's going to say district, county, years, min year to max year is missing in a shapefile, click OK, and that should now be configured. And now I can run this workflow. This takes a minute or so to run because there's now a lot of data coming through. There's 2 million rows in the data set for new builds, and we're joining every row to a shapefile. So this does get quite big. We can watch the join tools ticking over here. And once it's finished, we're going to see this data coming through. So there was 228 rows in my data set initially. That was too many messages, that would overwhelm me. So I aggregated them up to the district and county level and take them in year and max year. And then my final output for the messages looks like this. So Bournemouth, years 2000 to 2018 is missing in this shapefile. Bristol Avon was missing 2009. Chester was missing 2000 to 2009. Lots of these, in fact, are all that same date range of 2000 to 2009. So, yeah, in 2009, there was a redrawing of a lot of district boundaries, new districts being created, and some no longer existing. And so it seems that many pre-2009 that no longer exist as a local authority, I don't have the shapefile for. If I wanted to go back and get them, I can either speak to whoever in my company is in charge of looking after geospatial data, or just go online and find them myself. And I could, update this input and hopefully start to work these down. For me, it's not a critical error to completely stop the workflow. So I've just used the message tool rather than the error tool. And then everything else is flowing through. So this workflow now, with the addition of 5 or 6 tools, is going to be a lot more robust than this one. The biggest strength is really at the start, just cutting out any duplicate files before they come into the data. But then, it's always good. Pretty much wherever you'd have a browse tool coming out of a filter or a browse tool coming out of a join, replace those with messages or tests, and when unexpected events occur, then you've preempted them and you get those messages that are coming through to when you run that workflow. So that's the test tool and the message tool. The next thing that I want to introduce you to is a way of surfacing those messages and kind of getting them into a more readable format. So these ones exist in your logs when you run the workflow, but aren't hugely structured. They just appear there if you're running them locally, or in logs on server if you've got server. But I want to introduce you to the crew runner tools that can help take all those messages and warnings and put them into a table that you can read. So the crew runner tools don't come natively with Alteryx, but you can download them for free and add them to your Alteryx package. So if you search for crew macros Alteryx, you'll see a handful of blog posts on them. These were macros created by Adam Riley, an employee at Alteryx, and lately have been maintained by an Alteryx Ace marquee crew. You can follow this link, download their zip file, there's an install button, and you can install all of these macros into your Alteryx package. So we've got all of these tool groups like inputs, outputs, preparations, joins, parsing, and so on. But once you download and install the crew macros, you'll have another folder, a blue folder. It might be on the far right-hand side for you, but it's got all of these macros in it that you can use. There's a bunch of different handful ones like wildcard, inputting Excel files, every sheet from every Excel file in a folder. There's moving summarize. So if you want to take like a 7-day moving average on a table, moving summarize does that, and that's fantastic. But there's these 4 green tools that I really want to focus on today, which are the runner tool and the different variants on the runner tool. So the crew macros essentially the runner tools allow you to reference any other workflow in Alteryx and run it. So if I bring in the runner tool, I can browse for a workflow and call it from my my new workflow, my parent workflow here. So if I take that complete workflow and call it, when I run this one, the workflow is going to take that other workflow and run it in the background. there's two outputs on this crew macro. So there's S and F for if the workflow runs successfully, or if it runs with an error, if it fails. Both halves of this you can take and kind of take some information with and do what you want with. There's also a conditional runner if you want to daisy chain workflows, so run one workflow then another one. I can run a second workflow on the condition that the first one is a success, and I find a second workflow and I can have a third one, and so on. That allows you to daisy chain them together. That can be really useful if you've got multiple steps in your process where you only want one to run if the previous one ran successfully. In this case, I've only got the one workflow that I want to run, and when I run it, I'm going to get all of these messages out as a table, as a log output, and there's a crew macro that's going to pass those logs and turn them into a table. So I can take a log parser and pass my logs if they're successful, and I can also take another log parser and just connect it in case my workflow fails, if there's any errors. When it runs, there'll only be one output, but I want to catch the logs either side. And then I'm going to want to bring those together. So I'm bringing in a union tool to bring in those two logs. And then at the end, I can add a browse tool. Actually, let's not have a browse tool. Let's have an output. Let's actually write our logs to a file. I'm going to write these to a CSV. And I'm going to write my crew logs. So this parent workflow is taking that workflow and running it in the background. And once it's finished running, it takes about 20 seconds to run, it's going to pass the logs through one of these two log parser tools. The union tool is just going to collate them both streams together, so it doesn't matter which one it goes through. And then at the end, we're going to write those logs out. And so that's really powerful. As I said, there's also the conditional runner. There's also a tool called the list runner, and the list runner allows you to take a whole list of workflows rather than one and run them sequentially. So that can be really powerful if you've got 10, 20, 30 workflows that you want to run every morning. You can put them all in the list runner, and then running them all is a single press the button on play rather than having to open 10 workflows and running them all individually. And so this workflow runs. The data came out of the S output, so it ran successfully. And I can see module workflow. So my workflow was called complete workflow. So that's what it is. Succeeded, 0 errors, no conversion errors, 1 warning. Took 1 minute 13 seconds to run. And then there's these logs here. So that log is all of those messages that have come through. And then the log parser takes all of those messages, tool messages, so the directory input, 20 records are generated. Then I've got my warning that says file new build 2019 appears to be a duplicate file. Then there's the dynamic input tool that's telling me all of the files that are read in and how many records there were. Some other messages based on the true false, so filters, an output record to say file was written, 173 records, couple of messages on the joins, and then at the bottom we've got all of our custom messages saying Bournemouth 2000-2018 does not have a match, Bristol 2009 doesn't have a match, Chester, Chester Street, and so on do not have matches. So yeah, combining the crew runner tool with the log parser tool now gives us a record of all of the messages, warnings, errors, and so on from our workflows. And if we wanted to, we could build a dashboard or something like this just to track every time that our workflows run. We've got our logs. We could put this to a database and just append the new rows every time, and we can build a dashboard counting the number of errors for every workflow that we're running. So by orchestrating your workflows with the crew macros, you can get a lot more visibility out of them. And so that's our new build analysis and building robust workflows in Alteryx, make them more production ready. Everywhere you've got a browse tool, instead put in a message tool or a test tool just to catch the exceptions that you're looking for rather than looking for them manually. And then once you've got a more robust workflow, either have it on server and use the server logs to get that information, or if you're running it on desktop, use the crew macros, use these log outputs, and have a much better visibility of how your workflows ran, where there are any errors, and so on. So that's our session today on production ready workflows. Thank you very much. I've been Ian Baldwin. This recording will go up on the Information Labs YouTube channel in the next couple of days. So we're just going to edit this recording down and post it again. So if you want to share it with colleagues or friends, you'll be able to do that. Sophie Sparks will put the link to the YouTube video in the meetup group once it's posted there. And if you're part of the Information Labs network, and then also go on Combo as well. Thank you very much. Have a good Friday and have a good weekend. Thanks.